There are multiple ways to keep in touch with the Wolf Connection podcast. Through our Instagram handle, the Wolf Connection Pod. And for comments and questions, send us an email to podcast@wolfconnection.org with your comments, questions, and guest ideas for Stephen and myself. You may hear your question answered on an upcoming podcast. Thank you for your support, and howls to you all. Welcome to the Wolf Connection podcast. I'm your host, John Kalfa. Let's talk about some moles. Our many thanks to Bridget Von Holt for giving us our next guest for Stephen and I. She comes to us from Des Moines University. She has been the Associate Professor of Anatomy since 2019. She is also a vertebrate paleontologist and a functional morphologist. This is Dr. Julie Meachen. Julie, it's a pleasure to meet you. How are you doing?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me on your podcast.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, this is something that we haven't ventured into, which is really the fossil history of a lot of mammals and wolves and things of that sort. And you really come from that background. I want to ask really about how you got to this point, because looking at your history scholastically, you started out in zoology, then you go to ecology and evolutionary biology. So first off, where did you grow up? What was your upbringing like? And how did you get into ultimately studying mammals in the past as opposed to ones that are roaming around right now?
Good questions. So really, I've lived all over the place. When I was a small child, I lived in Chicago with my parents, and they used to take me to the Field Museum all the time. And one of the things I really loved about the Field Museum was all the taxidermied animals. So a lot of kids who kind of go into what I'm doing were obsessed with dinosaurs as kids, but I was actually obsessed with the taxidermied animals. And so I was always interested in mammals. And so I did a lot of moving around, like I said, ended up in Florida for high school. So I thought I wanted to be a vet. And it turns out I worked for a vet for a long time. I didn't want to be a vet. So when I ended up going to college at the University of Florida, I was kind of driftless. I just knew I loved animals, but I didn't know what I wanted to do. And I found an ad for employment in the vertebrate paleontology department at the museum, the Florida Museum of Natural History. And I applied for the job, and I actually didn't get it, but it started my curiosity with paleontology. So I ended up taking a class in paleontology. And then after that, I was hooked. So then I ended up volunteering at the museum, and eventually I did get that job just later, much later. So as an undergraduate, I worked and volunteered at the Florida Museum of Natural History in vertebrate paleontology, and then loved it so much, I ended up doing a master's degree in it at the same place at the University of Florida, and then went on to UCLA for my PhD. And I got into carnivores. I just simply really loved carnivores. I thought they were super interesting. You can probably hear my carnivore barking behind me. And so my dissertation was on cats. But, you know, I'm not just pigeonholed as a cat person. I love all carnivores. So dogs are definitely high on my list of favorite animals.
Yeah. So give everybody the background or the description of really evolutionary biology, paleontology, and how they really sort of mirror, or not mirror each other, but how they mesh together in your studies and what you're teaching now at the level that you're at Des Moines University.
So paleontology and ecology and evolution are tightly interlinked. Basically, paleontology is evolution and ecology with a little bit of geology mixed in. So it's what animals used to do in the past. So that's why we have to mix in geology, is because now they're fossils and they're found in the rock record. I really consider myself to be mostly an evolutionary biologist and an ecologist, and not a geologist. I have very little training in geology. Most of my training has been in, the ecology of animals, the anatomy of animals, the behavior of animals. So I really feel like I'm an expert on that end of the spectrum. And it's not really related to a lot of courses I teach at Des Moines University, although it is in a big way, one important way. And that is I teach gross anatomy to medical students and other health professional students. And mammals are all very similar in their anatomy. So humans are basically giant mammal. So I've done a lot of dissections of cats and dogs and other different kinds of mammals. And so humans are just another one of those mammals on that spectrum. So they're very similar. So all of the training that I've had led me up to this point where now I'm basically teaching human anatomy to med students. But part of my job, I also teach ecology and evolutionary biology to my graduate students. So I have 2 thesis students right now, and they are both specializing in paleontology and following sort of the kind of path that I did.
Wow. So what are the things that where does morphology come into this? And please let me know if I'm saying that correctly.
Yeah, you are.
Because so when I looked at it briefly, and again, it looks like it's the effect of climate change and extinction events at the end of the Pleistocene. So is that your zone of focus where you're looking at this evolutionary biology and all the stuff that's going on with these saber-toothed cats that you guys are starting to dig up, and these dire wolves and stuff like that? Is that typically what morphology is, or is there a different description and what it means in your area of study?
So morphology is actually just the study of body shape and form. So basically morphology is any type of body form or body shape. So for me, I specifically look at the shape and size of bones. So, because that's basically what we're working with fossils, right? We don't have any of the soft tissues left. So we're just left with bones. And so I look at the shape of bones to figure out what an animal was doing for a living. And that is what morphology is. So functional morphology is recreating an animal's life through its bones or its body shape. And so the area that I study is the end of the Pleistocene. It's basically the Ice Age. So that's my area of expertise, basically the last 50,000 years, looking at change in animals, especially carnivorous ones, through that time period.
So what have you noticed thus far that you've seen? What are the changes that you've seen, and what are some of, I'm just getting into this because I'm really excited about, fossils, and I always love dinosaurs and stuff like that. So when you're digging up these big mammals, what's, I guess, and we'll get into the frozen wolf puppy and Rancho La Brea and things like that, but is there any particular excavation that you were a part of that has stuck with you so far, something that you were looking for? You're like, oh, I'd love to dig up X, and I found it. Was there something that's that's happened so far for
you? There's nothing that is like, oh my goodness, I've been looking for this my whole life and now I found it. But right. I do have a fossil site that I'm the principal investigator on, or the PI. And it's a site in northern Wyoming called Natural Trap Cave. And we have found a lot of really awesome carnivores there. 2 particular of note. One is the American cheetah, which is a close relative of the living mountain lion. And a couple of my students are working on that. And that one is really amazing. But for your interests, the other species that I have at Natural Trap Cave that's super interesting is a wolf. And it's a gray wolf variant. It's not a dire wolf, which, as we know now from genetics, are very different from gray wolves. But this gray wolf is currently the oldest specimen that we have ancient DNA on from the lower 48 states. So the only thing that we have that's older is from Alaska, which is a different habitat, basically. So I'm really super excited about that. The work that we've been doing there has been really interesting, and we might actually better understand the origin of wolves in North America because of it.
How many important discoveries, I guess, as it relates specifically to Pleistocene wolves, have you come across in your career, like in your field of study, or have you worked on? I just don't hear of many. This is one of the most, prominent reports of something that I've heard, at least, from Pleistocene wolf findings. And I'm sure there's plenty out there, but how often do you come across things like this?
So it's pretty rare, actually. We found the frozen wolf pup, which we'll talk about later, but that was in the Yukon, that was in Canada. So the area of the world we call Beringia, which basically encompasses Siberia, Alaska, and northwestern Canada. there's a lot of wolves that have been found there in the last ice age. But in the lower 48 states, so basically in the mid-continental US, we have found very, very few gray wolf fossils. Very few that can definitively be called gray wolf, that give us links into their history in mid-continent North America. So it's actually really rare. And most people probably don't know that, but we'd love to find more. But the pieces that exist, the things that exist are just like little pieces of a skeleton or a tooth or something like that. There really aren't good fossil gray wolves in North America.
And are there folks out there specifically looking for wolf-related sites, or are these generally popping up by chance on larger excavations?
A little bit of both. There's a handful of us that really care about dogs in North America. So basically wolves, and then later domestic dogs and their fossil history. So there's 6 or 7 individuals who are really interested in this. And sometimes they're just found because they're part of another fossil site where somebody else has found something.
Could you describe for us, based on what just the overriding research out there reveals, about the environment that the Pleistocene wolf was living in? Like, if I'm correct, it was this period of like glaciation, pretty wild climate change. Can you paint any kind of picture as it relates to wolves and where they have been found, and what that kind of helps you to theorize about where and how they lived at the time?
Sure. So one of the things that we definitely know about gray wolves in the last ice age is that they're found in more northern latitudes. So in that time of glaciation and cold, it seems like the gray wolves are really cold adapted. And as we know, they really do well in cold environments even today, right? So they actually filled that niche in a cold environment as sort of the dominant large canine predator. Whereas lower in the mid-continental US, we have more dire wolves, which seem to fill the role of a more temperate or warm climate canine predator. And really, I think part of the reason why there's not a lot of gray wolves in North America is because the two of them were competing, and dire wolves were bigger. Right. And so dire wolves probably outcompeted them in a good portion of their range. So what we think really is that, wolves were adapted to those glaciated areas, to those really cold areas, those mountainous sort of pine foresty kind of areas in the last ice age.
Wow, that is incredible. And I mean, now they have, now wolves, the main competition for wolves is other wolves, right? But they also compete with grizzly bears for food and mountain lions for food when there's a carcass around. Because animals in the Pleistocene were, the host of predators was very different than it is today. Did they have any direct, were there any animals at the time that were big enough and competent enough to actually prey on wolves that were not other wolves?
Oh, that's a great question. It doesn't look like there were other carnivores preying on wolves per se, but there was probably a lot of competition from other carnivores, like American lions and cave lions probably gave wolves a lot of competition.
Short-faced bears.
Other things, short-faced bears, right. So all the bears probably would have been stiff competition for wolves. Those are the two big ones. There's a lot of other carnivores that are around at the time, but they're solitary for the most part is what we think. And so they probably weren't competing in large numbers with large packs of gray wolves.
Right.
Now in the southerly areas like and we'll talk about this later at Rancho La Brea, we have the saber-toothed cat, which would definitely compete with the dire wolves. Yeah. But the gray wolves just, we're going to be mostly up north. So those are the two big ones that I would think would compete with it.
Can you imagine walking out your door and a short-faced bear exists?
Or an American lion. Unreal. Those are huge. They're huge.
Actually, that's a good point. A lot of people don't know that there was like an American Maine lion, right? And I think there was an American cheetah, right?
Yeah.
Or
which has been credited as the predator that, what's that ungulate called that I always forget the name
pronghorn.
of? The pronghorn. Basically, they evolved with the pronghorn, and that's, well, the theory is that the pronghorn were being chased by American cheetahs, so they developed this great speed, but because of the landscape at the time, they didn't develop a skill for jumping. So now these wildlife fences are becoming a problem, I guess.
So that is really awesome that you brought this up. That's sort of is like Rudyard Kipling's Just So stories. So that's kind of been a Just So story for years, for decades actually. And my colleagues and I are actually trying to figure out whether it's true. And so we just put a paper out showing that cheetahs do eat pronghorn, but they eat a lot of other things, and a lot of other things also ate pronghorn. So, for example, the other big cats ate pronghorn. Now, did that mean the other big cats were chasing pronghorn? Maybe. It also might mean that the big cats were stealing kills after the cheetahs killed them.
Scavenging, yeah.
So that whole dynamic, we don't know exactly what's going on, but I got to tell you, I've seen lots of pronghorns, and they can certainly clear a fence.
I've seen it too. Yeah. That's why the theory was always like kind of, I've seen them jump before, but I think I read that theory that was like the popular theory. I read that in, what was that book? American Serengeti, I think. Which is about the Pleistocene era. But man, the Pleistocene era that's the coolest period in history to me. The animals that were around then are just,
Me too. Incredible. I love it.
Yeah, the mammals are crazy. Was the giant sloth part of that too? Were they in that? Yeah, I always think of that too, because we think of the sloth and it's this little guy, and the sloth. I mean, I think it was like 10 feet high or something. It was something of crazy, right?
Yes, they've been around for a while. They've been around since the Pliocene, which is the time period before the Pleistocene. So
10 feet high or something.
North
something
in
crazy,
the event
right?
we call the Great American Biotic Interchange. So basically where North and South America have a land bridge and animals cross back and forth on the land bridge. Yeah.
Wow.
Can you? I mean, you're right. So we basically had Africa before Africa. It's
coolest time period. The animals that were around then. And the short-faced bear lives in my brain all the time. I just think about what. Imagine if you just lived in a place where when you walked outside there was a short-faced bear somewhere. I mean, you wouldn't sleep.
You wouldn't sleep with with any of these animals.
They're like grizzlies that run marathons. I mean, it's the worst. I mean, it's the scariest animal out there.
So people did coexist with short-faced bears.
Which is
there
amazing.
Were people, yeah.
What's the DNA difference, or what are the main differences other than size that you can tell from dire wolves to to gray wolves? What's really the major differences that you're coming across?
So, they are very convergent in their morphology. So their body form is very similar. That's because they've basically evolved to do sort of the same thing, kill big ungulates, kill big hooved mammals during the Ice Age. The major difference between them is their DNA, is their relatedness. So it turns out the dire wolf and the gray wolf are separated by more than 3 million years of evolution. The dire wolf is basically a North American native. The gray wolf is a Eurasian descendant. And, the dire wolf really does like that warmer habitat than the gray wolf does. I would say that their skeletons look very similar. We don't know how different their outward appearance would have been. We actually imagine that they would look more like an Indian dhole, which is basically like a dog that has sort of reddish fur and is more lithe, sort of like leaner with a shorter coat. And so we kind of envisioned the dire wolf to look a little bit more like that, since they are more warm adapted. Whereas the gray wolf is going to have the bushy, gray and white
fur coat. Yeah.
Is there evidence to suggest that Pleistocene wolves were eating horses, like the three-toed horse that was around at that point? Actually, more directly, how do you study what wolves from that long ago were eating?
Great question. So just by the Pleistocene, horses only had one toe, just like they do now.
Okay.
So the three-toed horses were really old and little, teeny things. So the wolves were eating horses. We are pretty sure that we know that wolves were eating horses. And the way that we can reconstruct what animals back then were eating is by using this technique called stable isotope. And isotopes are basically your elements, so nitrogen, carbon, oxygen. And animals incorporate these elements into their bodies by eating things and drinking things. And so basically you are what you eat is absolutely true,
right, true.
In the Pleistocene as it is today. And so by analyzing the the nitrogen isotopes, which basically give us where the animal is on the trophic scale. So like, is it an herbivore? Is it a carnivore? What, sort of where is it on that scale? The carbon isotopes reflect photosynthetic pathways of plants. So different plants use different pathways, and that pathway is incorporated into their carbon.
Mm-hmm.
And then oxygen is incorporated into water. So basically the kind of water that the animal intakes. And so using those three isotopes, you can actually recreate what an herbivore was eating. So you would basically say, what kind of plants is this herbivore eating? So you need the isotopes from herbivores in the ecosystem to recreate what the carnivore was eating. So you basically want to take all the herbivore isotopes that you can. And generally we take them from teeth because a tooth enamel is so hard, it doesn't change over time. Whereas the nitrogen you can really only get from bone collagen. So you have to use bones for nitrogen, but you can actually reconstruct what the herbivores were eating. And using that, you can figure out which herbivores the carnivores were eating. And so that's how we know who's eating who in the Pleistocene.
That's unbelievable. Is there a process used that is effective when it comes to making an educated guess on cause of death, like of the individual you're looking at?
Sometimes you have clues and sometimes you don't. So, for example, we can tell if an injury happened before the animal died or around the time that it died. Or after it died to some degree. And so if you have those kinds of injuries, like maybe you've got a big tooth mark in your skull.
It's pretty obvious.
Then it's pretty obvious.
Right.
Sometimes you can see like pathologies like infections that haven't healed over properly. So you can guess based on that how the animal died. But most of the time, we don't have those kinds of clues. And it's just kind of a mystery exactly how they died. Although at the tar pits, it's not a mystery because everybody gets stuck in the tar. So
they just go down, yeah.
Which is incredible.
That's nuts.
Yeah.
That's wild.
I want to ask you too about because clearly there were you said there were humans, Homo sapiens back then. Have you been able to come across any human remains or whatever? I'm just going to say human remains, humanoids. Any remains that have been close enough to say either dire wolves or wolf remains that you could see that they were around in the same areas, or are we not looking for that in your areas?
So I will preface this by saying I am not an archaeologist,
right.
So it's not really my forte, but we do have different places, like different human settlements in areas where we know we found those things.
Mm-hmm.
So there is archaeological evidence. For example, there's lots of archaeological evidence in Washington State, I believe. I think there's some in Oregon. There's some in some other places in the U.S. And basically, those Pleistocene animals, those Ice Age animals have been found everywhere. And we can assume that they probably were even in places that we didn't find them as fossils because they're so widespread that we can basically recreate their ranges using climate and vegetation and basically determine that they're probably in every single state in what is now the U.S., but just might not be in certain habitats and found more in others. But I would definitely make a huge wager that humans and these Pleistocene carnivores were coexisting throughout the Pleistocene.
What about Pleistocene coyotes? Have you guys come across any of those specimens?
Yes. In fact, I published a study on Pleistocene coyotes, or at least what we think are Pleistocene coyotes, showing that they are a lot bigger in the Pleistocene.
Really?
So they really yeah. And so that kind of got me thinking, we think that all these different species that are still around today survived the Ice Age extinction event, but we're kind of rethinking that a little bit. And we know that there's a lot of size selection in that extinction event. So basically the extinction event killed off a lot of larger species and even the larger individuals of species that made it through the extinction event. And so it's possible that coyotes actually went locally extinct in certain areas and then other smaller coyotes moved in. Or it's possible that the extinction event, targeted even the larger coyote individuals, and the smaller ones were okay because they really decrease a lot in size between the end of the Pleistocene and what we know is after the extinction event. So they did change a lot. Yeah.
Wow. So I'm reading something that you wrote, I think, here. I was reading it and I did not know you wrote it. It says that the coyotes in the Pleistocene probably hunted juvenile horses, llamas, camels, and possibly juvenile bison. So these were definitely huge. Bigger. These were bigger critters.
Yeah, they probably could have killed juvenile, hooved mammals. So basically, we have coyotes around today that can kill deer, but they generally don't do it with regularity. Whereas in the Pleistocene, I think something that size would have been their regular size prey.
That's wild. That's amazing.
That's incredible. This is crazy stuff. I love it. I mean, talk about the natural trap cave, because you mentioned that. It just seems like this is this like your outdoor laboratory? I mean, I've seen the pictures, and it's just amazing. Like, certain people have labs and stuff like that, and you're outdoors at this site. Is this your site? Is this your baby where you're doing a lot of this awesome work?
Yeah, so I do have an indoor lab too, but Natural Trap Cave is certainly my outdoor lab. I've been at that site since 2014. It was originally excavated by a team from University of Missouri and the University of Kansas in the 1970s and 1980s. And they excavated it for a good 15 years, like in a row. Like, they really did a lot of excavation. They pulled out a lot of really cool stuff. It's all at the museum at the University of Kansas. And then I reopened it in 2014 along with a collaborator who I'm no longer working with. But he and I reopened this site sort of with the intention of trying to get good quality ancient DNA out. And as it turns out, the ancient DNA is okay. It's not as good as we had hoped, but it's blossomed into a huge project where we're basically looking at every aspect of the cave. We're looking at all the pollen. We're looking at the sediment in the cave, like the dirt, the volcanic ashes that are in there from Yellowstone, all of the little critters like rodents and rabbits, and then all of the big things, like the things we've been talking about. And it's basically become this huge project. The cave is really cool. It's basically like, it's an 80-foot deep sinkhole at the end of a little ridge. So basically the animals were running, didn't see the hole, fell in all the way. We know how they died too. I mean, they fell 80 feet. They probably broke all their limbs if, didn't starve to death in the cavern because there's no way to get out. And so it's just an amazing site. I've been digging there since 2014. There's really no end to the deposits. So, wow. I mean, we could probably dig there forever, although I probably won't. It's a huge undertaking. It takes a lot of effort, a lot of logistics to get everybody up there. The road is really hard to get up. The cave is really hard to get into. We've got to use like caving techniques and SRT gear to get in, and we rappel in and ascend out every day. So it's just like this incredible thing. It's just it's a lot of work.
Oh yeah.
But it's really rewarding.
What's the average day like? I mean, what are is it dusk till dawn? Are you only excavating one piece of one animal at a time? What's the typical day like for you and your team when you're there and you're excavating?
So we're up at about 6:37. So when the sun comes up, my partner, John, who's actually a professor at the University of Iowa, he's a molecular biologist, but he's basically my unofficial camp manager. So he makes breakfast for everybody every morning. And then we kind of get all our gear together and we get down to the top of the cave. We start loading people in by like 9:30. We usually get in there about 10:30. Usually we have about 8 people go in a day, and everybody works on a different part, excavating different things. The sediment is really easy to work with. It's very silty. It's kind of like digging in a sandbox almost. And the bone assemblages are basically right on top of each other. So it's just like bone on bone on bone on bone. And so as you uncover one bone, you run into another bone. As you uncover that bone, you run into another bone. So it's basically super rich. And we let anybody come and excavate, anybody who's able to get into the cave, who we know, who can volunteer. So lots of people are able to come out and help with the process. Once we're done for the day, we do eat lunch down there. So we basically spend like a 6-hour day in the cave. And at the end of the day, we start sending people out on rope. And so it usually takes about an hour to get everybody out. So we usually start sending people out around 3:30 or 4, and we're out by 5.
So do you have a selection process for what you remove from the cave, or some stuff you're allowed to remove from the cave, or do you remove 100% of the finds, or are you very selective because a lot of it's likely redundant?
We remove 100% of what we find. The only exception being if it's little tiny pieces of bone scrap that are completely unidentifiable, we might leave those down there because nobody can really do anything with those. So, but everything that looks like it could even be an identifiable piece, we take that out. So it's all owned by the Bureau of Land Management, and we get our permit from them, and then it goes into a scientific repository. And right now, all the stuff we collect is going into the museum at the University of Wyoming. So, cool. It all goes to science. It all goes to science.
Wow. Dang. And how many species, if you know off the top of your head, have you been able to identify, pull out, and donate to science at this point?
Oh my goodness. Okay, so I'm not even going to talk about the small animals because
like squirrels and stuff.
Like rodents and stuff. So we have mammoth. It's not very common, but we have it. We have
a full specimen or
no.
parts.
Parts. Yeah,
parts. Okay.
We have a short-faced bear, and Kansas basically collected a full specimen of a short-faced bear. We have multiple American lions. We have multiple American cheetahs. Lots of the wolves that's there. Some dire wolf, because we've gotten specimens from there, but it's very rare. Lots of horse, tons and tons of horse. Sheep, pronghorn, bison, camels. We do have, and wolverines. We've got wolverines. We've got lots of foxes. Got some small cats like a bobcat or a lynx. What else have we found? I think that's most of it.
And they all just fell in this cave?
Yes.
Any theory on why animals are just falling into this hole?
Yeah, there's like a little lip. There's like a little hill. And then at the bottom of the hill is the opening to the cave. So nobody can see it until you're on it. So basically, most of the things that fell in are running animals. They run for a living. And so basically, they were probably just running.
They're just
for their life, like maybe running to catch their dinner or to avoid being dinner. And in they went.
So how do you, so why do you, in terms of like a mammoth, for example, this massive animal, why do you only find parts of it? Is it because different parts of it decompose at different intervals, different parts of the body travel through sediment in different ways because they're different weights and densities? Or like why when you see why when you're finding mammoth parts, don't you just find the whole thing?
That's a great question. And I think you pretty much hit it right on the head. We don't have very many of them because mammoths don't run. And so we imagine it might have fallen in like maybe in the winter when it was icy and it might have slipped in or something. Mm-hmm. And so basically we don't find whole animals with any regularity. And I think it's because sediment moves around, rocks fall on them, it crushes part of them. There's a lower chamber down at the bottom. We think things might actually go slipping down into that chamber. So pieces break up. There's a lot of water that flows into the cave through rain and snow melt. And so we think that basically that water action disarticulates the skeletons after the animal is dead and the soft tissues have decomposed. And it just sort of like spreads them out. And so we do get some stuff we assume is from the same individual in the same area, but it's not like we get like a whole skeleton. Which I wish we would, but we don't. It just isn't like that.
How old do you estimate the cave itself is? Has anybody given an idea of like how it was created and when it formed and why it formed?
Yeah, so it's made out of limestone. It's a limestone cave. The limestone was formed in the Cretaceous, I believe. It's laramide limestone, so that's the age of the limestone. And then through, hundreds of thousands of years of water, basically getting into the middle of the limestone and like wearing away a big hole, it becomes a sinkhole, basically it becomes a cavern or cave. And then there's a crust on top. And when the crust falls in, then it's a sinkhole. Basically, it opens up to the outside. So the cave, the limestone itself has been around since the dinosaurs were here. But the stuff that fell into the cave is a lot younger than that because the cave had to actually have the crust fall in. So we think that things have been falling in for at least 100,000 years because we have volcanic ashes that are that old in there. But we don't know if it's older than that. And we haven't even gotten close to the bottom and we probably never will. So we don't know.
That is so cool. And it speaks to your point of evolution and these smaller types of mammals surviving. The wolverines, we know wolverines still around, bobcat, lynx, the American, the gray wolf, the smaller coyotes. And it really speaks to that where people say some of the great extinctions that have happened, that the larger animals are just, they can't survive with either whatever it's changing temperatures and the changing atmospheres and things that happen. And there's not enough food and they can't survive. It's wild. What led you to Rancho La Brea then? Because if we're doing the natural trap cave, and what's the draw to find canids there, and are you looking for something different, or was it just a different set of circumstances that led you there?
So I have actually been doing work at Rancho La Brea long before I was doing work at Natural Trap Cave. I've been doing work at Rancho La Brea since I started my PhD in 2003. Since I did go to UCLA, Rancho La Brea is right around the corner. And since I was working on cats and carnivores, Rancho La Brea was just a natural place for me to go because it's a carnivore trap. So if anybody doesn't know what that is, basically what happened was there's this sticky asphalt that we call tar. And water, like a shallow pool of water might have covered a tar seep. And an herbivore would get stuck in the sticky asphalt and it would wouldn't be able to get out, and it would cry and scream, and it would attract all these carnivores that would come and basically jump on it like free dinner, right? But then the carnivores would get stuck. So basically for every one herbivore, there's about 10 carnivores at Rancho La Brea. And the species that are most common are the saber-toothed cat, Smilodon fatalis, and the dire wolf. And so these two species, are really found in abundance there. I mean, like there's hundreds and hundreds of specimens of them, which is far more than anywhere else in the world. And so my dissertation was on prey size preference in cats. So what size prey cats preferred depending upon their size, and how we see the changes in their skeleton based on that. And then I also incorporated an aspect of fossil cats. And so I worked a lot on the Smilodon, the saber-toothed cat, and I worked a lot on the American lion for my dissertation. And then when my dissertation was over, I thought, let me get in on this dog action. So I started studying some of the canids at Rancho La Brea, including the coyotes, which weren't well studied, and things like that.
Wow. I mean, sounds like what you're saying is tar pits are extremely rare. Do we see these now? I've never heard of one, like a recent one that we're finding now with modern animals in it.
So the Rancho La Brea tar pit still catches animals. So you can actually still find like little animals stuck in the tar at Rancho La Brea. They are not super rare. They're found all over the world. There's a couple other sites in California where they're found. There's lots of them in South America. There's some in the Middle East. So there are tar pits all over the world, but Rancho La Brea is the only one that's in the middle of a giant city. And that's why it's been so extensively excavated, is because every time they want to build a new art museum or a parking garage or a street or anything, they have to basically get all the fossils out of the ground first. And so,
no way.
Yeah. And so they have there's mitigation teams that actually work in LA. My good friend Eric Scott is the head of one of them. So they basically come in and they get all the fossils out before they build a new freeway or something.
So why are there so many dire wolves in there? Or is it just frequency? There were a lot of them, or is there some other reason why they're well enough preserved where you're finding so many of those?
There were probably a lot of them in Southern
yeah.
California, but that's not the only reason. There was a study done several years ago by my dissertation advisor and her colleagues that showed that when you do these playback experiments in Africa, so basically you play the sound of a dying wildebeest, for example, the carnivores that come to it are the large social carnivores. So hyenas, lions, hunting dogs come at much greater frequencies than any other carnivore. And so what we think is that dire wolves and Smilodon were social. And so they were the ones that would come when these herbivores were crying and dying, right?
Oh,
and
wow.
so that's why there's so many of them, is because they're social, because they come in groups and they probably get stuck in groups.
Wow. So I don't know how accurate the models are of dire wolves. I mean, you can see renditions of them, paintings or whatever. They seem to look very different in color, size, dimension. Is there, I mean, to gray wolves, but is there a theory about why when they split from that common ancestor with gray wolves, why they ended up just developing so much differently?
Well, it's just all about the habitat you live in,
right,
and like who you're hunting. And, coat pattern and color evolves to be camouflage.
Landscape.
Right?
Yeah.
And so it sort of depends upon the landscape that they evolved in. Like we said, the gray wolves are much more cold adapted, and the dire wolves are much more warm adapted.
Desert.
Yeah. And maybe more desert. So they're going to have a different color coat. And that's basically, so those reconstructions you've seen, I was one of the people that helped to basically recreate those.
That's awesome.
And we did that based on, what we know about its ecology.
Right. That's cool, man.
What do you expect their lifespan? What do you have an average age of the dire wolves or the gray wolves that you found over the course of your research? Were they living longer back then, or were they living roughly around the same age as they are now? 4 or 5 years old, something like that? Younger, older? What were you finding out about that?
Well, they probably were living about the same. These canids, these carnivores have a hard life. They really are, they've got to fight for their dinner, right? And so, any number of things could happen. You could get kicked in the face by a giant herbivore. That's not going to do well, They get hurt. They get in fights with other carnivores. So they don't really have any longer life expectancy. And my guess is in the Pleistocene, life was even harder.
Yeah,
there was much more competition for the herbivores that were out there. And so I think, social carnivores tend to fare better than solitary carnivores because they do have, like, if they get injured or something, they have someone that can feed them. But they're not going to be living any longer than they are now. And, now we have a whole different suite of problems, right? Like there's habitat encroachment, there's humans that don't like them, all sorts of other things. But I think that their natural lifespan in the wild is probably similar to what it is now.
So I want to move on to this
Yukon
frozen
pup.
Yeah, this Yukon pup.
Mm-hmm.
So give us the background on this, because I found the article and they were speaking with you. So just tell everybody how it was found, and then I know it was named, I think, in the native language up there, Zhur. I think Zhur.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yep.
And roughly 57,000 years old, almost perfectly mummified. So just give everybody the background on this, how it was found, and what this really means to find something that's this well preserved.
Yeah. So first of all, I'll say to find something this well preserved is really rare. I mean, it's super rare, especially in Canada where it's from. So it's from the Yukon in the area called the Klondike, which actually the word Klondike is sort of a bastardization of the word Trondak, who are the native peoples that live there. So she was named Zhur by the Trondak who are the native first peoples there in that area of Canada. So she was found in 2019, the summer of 2019, by a gold miner named Neil Lovelace. And they basically mine for gold in the Yukon by using these high-powered hoses. They're like fire hoses. And there's this like black permafrost that's huge. It's like, 70 feet wall of this black muck, this black permafrost. And so they take these high-powered hoses and they like shoot it at this permafrost, and stuff falls out, including gold. And then they, pan that, and they take that gold and make money. But Neil Lovelace was shooting his water cannon at this wall, and something fell out. And he was like, oh, that doesn't look like gold. That looks like an animal. That looks like something. And so he went over and he grabbed it. And it turns out in Canada, unlike the United States, the gold miners have a really good relationship with the paleontological community there. So they all work together. So Neil basically knew all the paleontologists, and he said, I found this. I'm not quite sure what it is. Is it an old gold miner's puppy? Like he thought maybe it was a puppy that was lost and died in like the early or late 1800s when all the gold mining was going on there. And the paleontologist took one look at it and was like, no, this is old. This is a fossil. This is a big deal. And so they took it to the Restoration Center in Eastern Canada. I can't remember what it's called, but they basically preserved her, and they brought out this puppy that was completely mummified, preserved with the fur and the, soft parts, the nose, everything was there. The genitalia, we could actually tell that she was a girl because she had a little vulva. And the only thing that was missing were her eyeballs, which are usually the first thing to go because of bacterial processes, etc. So she was 100% complete. And I didn't start working on the project until late 2019. Actually, was it found? It was found in the summer of 2016. I apologize, not 2019. I started working on it in late 2019. I flew out to the Yukon, and my work on her was mostly morphological. So I basically measured her body and, reported on all that. And then I wrote the paper all about her. So we had a huge team working on her. Everybody did different things. We basically figured out what she ate, how old she was, how long ago she died, all these really cool things. I'm happy to talk about any of those things if you want to know more about it.
Yeah. Tell us all of it, all the stuff you were saying, how old she is, everything, what she was eating, all that.
So we used morphology basically to figure out how old she was. She has all her baby teeth in, and we used modern wolf pups to figure out like when they get their teeth, which is about 5 weeks. So we know she was at least 5 weeks old. And that's about when they wean. And the way we actually got to about 8 weeks of age is because we took x-rays of her and we looked at her ossification center. So there's basically, as bones start to turn to bone, they go from cartilage to bone at different times in development. And for pups, the tip of your elbow, which is a bone called the ulna, this is the olecranon process of your ulna, forms like a ossification cap. So basically the end of it starts to turn to bone. And that happens around 8 weeks. And that's basically exactly what was happening with her. So we know she was about 8 weeks old when she died. We figured out what she was eating using the stable isotope reconstruction. Our good colleague, Matt Wooler from University of Alaska Fairbanks ran that. And he basically figured out that she had weaned, right? So she didn't have a nitrogen signal of eating breast milk, which would basically be like, the nitrogen signal of eating breast milk is basically like a carnivorous, like a hyper carnivorous. So it would basically be like eating mom, right? Because mom makes the milk. So she no longer had that signal. So we know she was eating her own food. And through other isotopes, we reconstructed that she was eating a lot of fish. So a lot of salmon probably. And using other isotopes or oxygen isotopes, actually, we figured out what glacial cycle she lived in. So basically different glacial and interglacial cycles have different oxygen signatures. And her oxygen signature put her at an interglacial cycle, which basically meant it would have been a little warmer. There would have been more free water, which makes sense with fish, right? So there were actually probably anadromous salmon swimming all over that area at that point in time. And the other thing we figured out about her, just from her age and when pups are born, is she likely died in July. So that also makes sense. So salmon are probably going to be more common in the summertime when the water is free and liquid. And we figured out how old she was. We did radiocarbon dating, but radiocarbon dating only goes to 50,000 years. Anything older than that, we don't know. It's going to give us an infinite age, meaning like no. So we actually figured out how old she was using something called a molecular clock. So we got ancient DNA from her, and our colleague Beth Shapiro at UC Santa Cruz ran the ancient DNA, found out who she was related to, which was not a big surprise. It was basically other Siberian and Beringian wolves of that time period. And but she did a molecular clock on her. So basically that looks at her DNA and estimates her age based on how far away she is from other ancestors. And so using that molecular clock estimate, we arrived at about 57,000 years in addition to that isotope. So basically that marine interglacial stage. So using the isotopes and the ancient DNA, we figured out she was about 57,000 years old.
Okay, so she probably is about 57,000 years old, or that's as far as you can go, and so probably she's older.
No, we actually narrowed her age down based on both the molecular clock and the isotopes.
I see.
We were able to actually say I think the range we got was 56 to 58,000.
Wow. Okay.
I mean, how confident is one that she's 57,000 years old? Meaning, like, is the technology such that, like, if you had to bet your house on this, would you be confident that this is the range that she was living in?
And 56 to 58, I don't know if I would bet my house on it, but I certainly would bet, like, something on it. Because the technology really does give you that range. Like, it gives you, so basically what happened was 56,000 was the max, or maybe, no, it was 58,000 was the max on the marine isotope stage. Mm-hmm. I think it was 23,000 to 58,000, and 56,000 was the min for her molecular clock. So I think that's where we got that truncated 56 to 58,000.
What an incredible technology. Did she, a specimen like this that was this intact, did she provide any conflicting conclusions? Anything that conflicts with what was assumed about Pleistocene wolves before finding her?
No, we didn't get any conflictions. We did get, we couldn't get a lot of information about certain things like how she died. We assumed that she suffocated in a den that was a den collapse, because that happens a lot in that area, that the ground sort of just collapses, and there was no other obvious signal of why she would have died. Like, she didn't have, usually when an animal is sick and starving, you can tell in their isotopes that they're not healthy at the end of their life. And we didn't see any indication of that. And she had no marks on her, like predator bite marks or anything. So we know she didn't get killed by a predator. So we just assume that she probably died from a den collapse.
She was just laying down.
Yeah, in her den.
I mean, just looking at the photo, the teeth are fully intact.
I know, the fur is wild to me.
The fur is wild. Yeah, it's just amazing that all of this is there. It's incredible. I mean, was this the most? What was the last? Was there even a last time that a specimen this intact was found? I don't even know. Like I said, this has to be rarest of the rare.
So there's a lot of these kind of specimens found in Siberia, which is Russia, right? And they're a different preservation. So a lot of the stuff found in the Yukon seems freeze-dried, like it's frozen and it's dehydrated. Whereas the stuff that's found in Siberia is actually like flash frozen. So it's basically like intact completely, like it's soft tissue. Like you could thaw it out and cook it. And
Unreal.
eat it.
Wow.
unfortunately, with the conflict in Russia, a lot of my colleagues who worked with Russian scientists can't do that any longer. So it's been like a resource that's been totally lost at this point. Hopefully it'll be back at some point, but we don't know when. With the Yukon, these finds are pretty rare. There have been a couple. There was an ox that they called Babe, the blue ox, basically, that was found. And it was just like the front half of an ox. And there's been a horse that was found, like part of a horse. And most recently was the baby mammoth.
Yes, I remember
Yeah.
the baby mammoth.
The baby mammoth was recent. The baby mammoth was super recent. Nunchoga, I believe her name is. And so I think because of climate change and global warming, we're going to find more of these things. It's sort of a double-edged sword. It's like the earth is warming and the ice is melting, and that sucks. But now all these cool mummified animals are coming out. So
yeah, I have to ask about that. I've heard, and I don't know if this is just like a wild theory, but I've heard there's some kind of reservation about digging up some of these old mummified critters because they could expose people to very rare ancient diseases or viruses. Is that a legitimate concern, or is that kind of just a headline?
It is actually a legitimate concern.
Is it?
There
Wow.
are some pathogens that are in the dirt and stuff like that can be reanimated. Right? There's things like tardigrades that never die; they just desiccate and sort of sit and wait to be reanimated. And so that's what we worry about with some of these diseases. I don't know if the worry is so much getting the diseases from the animal itself or getting it from like the melting dirt, and all these weird pathogens being released from the dirt. Additionally, like carbon is being released, right? So carbon dioxide is being released, which is not helping anything, right? So, there are concerns about pathogens.
It's literally a sci-fi movie. It's crazy. It's like waiting. What is this like for you just on a regular basis, Julie? Because I mean, this we're just talking about it. We've done an hour on this already. For you to be, is every day a surprise? I mean, it seems like these big things keep happening. Are you not surprised anymore, or are you just as excited as when the next thing comes about?
I'm still pretty excited. I mean, like, this is the part of my job I absolutely love. This is why I do what I do. And, when I got asked to work on the wolf pup, I think I like screamed. I was just so excited. So, I hope that I get asked to work on more of these projects. I, make who is a lot of the world of paleontology, just like everywhere else. And when you have collaborators that like you and enjoy working with you, they're gonna give you repeat business, right? Like they're gonna want to work with you again. And so I'm friends with Grant Zazula, who's the paleontologist in the Yukon. And so every time they find something cool, he tells me about it. Like he texts me and he's like, "Look at what we found today." And I get excited, and I get excited for him. Like even with the mammoth, even though I'm not going to work on that one because I don't work on mammoths, like I'm excited for them, and I'm excited about these finds. And I guarantee that if he finds any frozen carnivores, I'm going to be the first person he calls, which is
You're
exciting.
On the next plane, yeah.
So I really get excited about it still. Yeah.
All right, let's just pretend you're not like this well-known, accomplished professional, and you're the giddy teenage version of yourself. What is I know you're not looking for anything specific out there. You're just trying to say what it is, say what the science shows. But if there's a thing that you just dream about finding, what is it?
Oh, either an American cheetah mummy or a Smilodon mummy, like a whole adult mummy. That would just be like the bomb. Like I would just be like so incredibly over the moon if one of those things was found. Like I would probably like want to pee in my pants. I was so excited.
So a Smilodon is what, the alternative
saber-tooth
name
cat.
for a saber-tooth tiger.
It's a saber-tooth
yeah, okay.
cat. Yeah.
I never heard that. Okay, that's awesome. Yeah, that'd be, I mean, if they found a full-blown saber-tooth tiger, the world would be up in arms about that.
Yeah.
It's such a popular critter.
It really is.
Right.
It seems like it's popular for you. I mean, Julie, is that your favorite? I mean, you went with cats. Is that your all-time?
Well, I think it'd be a toss-up between the saber-tooth cat and the dire wolf. Like they're both just like my all-time faves. I mean, my Twitter handle is SaberCatWoman, but
which is great.
But, I love dire wolves equally. I think they're just so cool. They're my
no
favorite.
short-faced bears, right? Any like full specimen short-faced bears?
I mean, like that would be amazing. But, I have a colleague who would probably pee his pants over that one. But no, I mean, like that would be amazing. I would be insanely excited if that was found. But, those two cats. And the reason why is because nobody really knows what they look like. Everybody guesses. And it would just be so incredible.
Yeah. I mean, anytime you look online with a saber-toothed cat, I was just looking now on Google Images, and it's either a long, slinkier cat with huge, canines that are going down, or it's this like larger than life. It's like a cross between a tiger and a lion in terms of the size. And it's just like, it's this menacing.
It's probably more massive. Like they're huge.
Yeah.
They have huge bones, which probably they had huge muscles. They were probably just huge. I mean, enormous.
I mean, if you were to relate it to any felid now, would you say larger than tiger or, tiger size?
I would say tiger size, like the large tiger size, like maybe like a Siberian tiger size. And I would say built like a jaguar.
This is actually my last question. Then I'll let John ask his last question. Why did saber-toothed tigers develop these massive canine teeth and other cats just don't?
Oh my God, that's a whole show in and of itself.
Okay.
I will give you the short. I'll give you the
short answer.
Crash course on why their teeth are so gigantic.
Basically, it's this selection that happens through time. We think that it's an alternate way of killing prey. So they don't kill prey the same way that living cats do. They have a different way to do it. And it's something that's very niche, right? Like, somebody loves this weird thing over here. And that's basically what happened with saber-toothed cats. They sort of evolved into a corner. And they got very, very good at what they did, but it basically made it so they couldn't get out of that little corner. Yeah. And so what happens is, they evolve into this one thing. And then when times change or something changes, they go extinct. Yeah. So, and it's happened multiple times, many, many times over the course of history, or the course of prehistory, I should say, that these long teeth evolved that are the special way to kill prey. But the ultimate answer is we don't know. That's, like a question that my colleagues and I have been trying to answer for a long time.
That's freaking cool, man.
I mean, we're gonna have to have you back on now, just I think, to talk about saber-toothed cats, because we'll
have to somehow make it about wolves. I don't know how we'll do that. But
no, we will.
I was gonna say, aren't you guys a wolf show?
No, we are. We'll figure it out.
We figure it out.
We're good at roping stuff in like that. All right. So I'll ask my last question, Julie, but then I want you to stick around after we wrap up, because I got a couple more things to ask you. So my last question for you is, when you hear the word wolf, what is the thing that comes to your mind?
Oh, I mean, like I always think of wolf evolution, right? I always think of wolves in the past. I love wolves. I adore them. I think they're amazing. I've never actually seen them in the wild. I've desperately tried. I have friends that work at Yellowstone, and it's like the guy that I know is always out of town every single time I go. And so like, I can't get up in the helicopter and go. I need to go with Bridget. She goes up in the helicopter and sees wolves all the time at Yellowstone. But like, I would love to see them in the wild. I'd love to just sit and watch them. But I always want to know, like, where did they come from in North America? When did they get here? What did they look like? What's going on with their history? And I always think about the evolution of wolves.
I love that. I love that so much. Tell everybody where they can follow you social media wise, and then what are some of the papers that they should be reading from you, and where can they find those as well?
Sure. So social media wise, I do have a Twitter handle. I don't check it very often. I'm not really on Twitter much. It's SaberCatWoman. So at SaberCatWoman. I don't do any other socials except Facebook, and generally that's just friends. But they can check out my work website. I've got all my publications listed there. And some of the papers that are really great and fun are the paper about Zhur, which is in Current Biology. It's in the December 2021 or 2020, excuse me, December 2020 volume of Current Biology. That should be open access, I believe, at this point. I think anybody should be able to access that. The Nature paper on direwolf DNA that came out in 2021 as well. I think that was early 2021, around May or so. But that's definitely one. Its lead author is Angela Perry, who is now an assistant professor at Texas A&M. And she's great. She also works on dogs. And then also I have a paper about the wolves at Natural Trap Cave in Ecology and Evolution that came out in 2016. It's basically about the wolves. I call them Beringian wolves. So if you look for my name in Beringian wolves, that paper should come up. That's a really interesting paper on the wolves that we find at Natural Trap Cave. And if people are interested in papers, keep your eyes peeled in the next year or so, because we'll have one coming out about the ancient DNA of the wolves at Natural Trap Cave.
That's going to be great.
Anybody who's listening to this episode, I will have those 3 papers that Julie just named in the description, so you guys will be able to read those and obviously promote her work. Dr. Julie Meachen, thank you so much. This was a pleasure. This was awesome.
Thanks, guys.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah. How's to all you out there? And Stephen, I'll be with you next time. Bye, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Looking to support Wolf Connection or sponsor one of the wolves in our pack? Just go to wolfconnection.org, click on the donate tab, and find out more information.